What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the episode of Travis Makes Friends. Okay, so over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be doing something a little differently than what we usually do. If you are new to the show, this is not typically how we do things here. Usually, I'm the one interviewing other people. That's kind of the whole point of Travis Makes Friends, and that's pretty much all I've done for almost 7 years now of having the show. I try to find the most interesting people that I can and ask them the best questions that I can. And that provides the bulk of the content. However, we realized recently that there are a ton of new subscribers to the show, which is awesome. Thank you and welcome. But you may not know much about me or who I am or what my story is. So over the next couple of weeks, we will be flipping the script. And my producer, Eric, is going to come in and actually interview me for the next couple of weeks, just to give you guys a better idea and understanding of where I come from, what my story is, and how I got to where I am now today. So, hope you enjoy these episodes. Please, as usual, reach out. Let us know what resonated with you, what didn't, what we could be doing better to make the show better for all of you guys. And yeah, this is kind of the Travis Makes Friends with all of you type of episodes. So let us know what you think.
You've done hundreds of interviews. You've asked people like Grant Cardone, Shaq, Dane Cook, John Maxwell, Nicole, LePera. I think John Maxwell's a big Dane Cook fan, actually.
Is
if
he?
I had to guess. That's probably a favorite. But you've asked all these people the same question, which is who you know or what you know. Before I have you answer that question for yourself, it sounds like growing up, you were really defined by what you know, and the who around you was there to reinforce what you know. Is that an accurate description?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that was kind of still where I learned the who you know piece, just because, we grew up very sheltered in this cultish world of independent fundamental Baptists, but I happened to grow up at arguably, for that time period, the biggest, most progressive or leading the charge church inside of that movement. And so I still watched the who you know dynamics at work all the time.
Yeah.
Where in the context of a church, it seems odd because, you growing up or Jackie growing up, my wife growing up, like that you guys grew up in IFB churches. But I feel like the majority of my friends who didn't grow up where I grew up had kind of intimate relationships or closer relationships with their pastor, and it just wasn't that way for us. And it wasn't because Pastor Chapel didn't try. It was just because the church was massive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? When we started going there, it was like 1,500. By the time I stopped going there, it was like, I don't know, 7,000-8,000 members of the church. So, it's impossible for him to talk to that many people. And so I saw the who you know politics at play all the time because he was like the guy in that world, and so the people who got the opportunities were the people who were in that, inner circle, were in that connected, part of the nucleus of the church. And so I think I picked up on a lot of that. I think I've always just been kind of an observer. So when I don't know what I should be doing, I just observe what people who are more successful than me are doing, and I kind of just, model what they do. And I saw a lot of that at play. But for the most part, you're right. It is more just about like, here's what to believe and what you should know. And then you should not seek anybody in your circle that would contradict anything that you already believe, because that means they're wrong. And that's just going to tempt you from, being correct.
Who were the biggest inputs then in that model where you've got limited access to like the main leader who's guiding the ship? Like, who were the input pieces that like influenced?
He was definitely like at the top of the list.
Yeah.
And then there would be just like key evangelists that came in, who were just like the best speakers in that world, like Getch and Skelly and different people like that. And then youth pastors, anybody who held a position of authority who seemed to be like a likable, ambitious person, were just, they had that magnetic personality that people are drawn to. And so I always looked up to people like, Gibbs, even anybody who could get up in front of the whole auditorium in front of, at leadership conference, and it's packed out and there's 3,000 or 4,000 people in there, and they're commanding the whole crowd, and they can get people to laugh, and they can get people to cry, and they can get people to give money, and they get people to say amen, and they can get people to, stand up or sit down, do it. Like, they know how to command a crowd and command an audience. And there's always something attractive about that, to anybody sitting in the crowd. So all of those people, and for whatever reason, I always had some level of ambition. I don't know exactly how to articulate that or where it came from or why I had a chip on my shoulder from a young age, but I did, and I always wanted, when I saw outsized versions of success on display in front of me, I wanted that.
What was success for you in that environment?
Oh, being on stage and preaching to people,
Did you ever, I don't think I've ever actually asked you that. Did you ever actually want that version of it? Like where you're like, I want to be a pastor. I want to be a speaker. I want to be, because I never ever wanted that.
No, I did. No, I was since I was 12, I was like called to the ministry at youth conference when I was 12.
That's when
Yeah, that's really 12, when you have life pretty much
forever.
figured out. Yeah, there's nothing to do.
Firefighter or pastor of a megachurch.
So obviously, growing up in that type of a church where you're at church essentially more than you're at home, especially because that's also where our school was that I went through K through 12. So and college. So it's like you're there Monday through Friday for school. You have chapel and Bible class and all that stuff, and then you're there same campus for church on Sunday twice. Sunday morning, Sunday night, plus you have Sunday school, plus I served in the bus ministry. So I'd get there like 6:30 a.m. and then do the bus ministry. We would go pick up kids for church, come back, bring them to class, go to our own class, go to big church, go drop them off.
Big church.
Then, big
I
church.
still call it big church.
I know. Big church where the adults go.
Big church. Yeah.
And then, go drop them off, get home at like 3 p.m, taking like an hour long, nap at home, or usually it was when my dad would put me to work in the yard. So I'd, get home, change, go do yard work for a couple hours, and then get changed back into your Sunday clothes and go back to church Sunday night. And we had church Wednesday night, and then we had missions conference and youth conference and spiritual leadership conference. And we're just at church all the time. Yeah. So when you grow up in that world, I think that, as a kid, you want to be what's emulated in front of you. So even from a young age, my parents had me fill out this like questionnaire every year before I started school that was just like, how old are you and what's your favorite color, and, just like different things about you so you can kind of look back.
That's a good idea, actually.
Yeah, no,
cool.
it is. Yeah. And when I look back on it, it was always like police officer, firefighter, and pastor was always one of the options, as was real estate agent, because that's what my dad was. So just like the things that you're exposed to. Yeah, exactly. Like, sure. Underlining. Yeah. But as a kid, I think you're attracted to what you're exposed to, especially when it's like it's projected in this really positive light, which obviously the ministry was. And so by the time I was 12, it was my first ever youth conference, and I was called to ministry at 12. So from then on, I thought I was going to be a preacher. Yeah. I went to preaching camp that summer. So I was like 12 or 13. I went to preaching camp, which is essentially, it's literally just the guy, Dr. Getch, who teaches preaching at the college, and preaching in college classes is homiletics, which is the study of preaching. And so they teach homiletics 1 as an interim in the summer to high school and junior high kids that want to go take the class. So it's literally a college level preaching class that they taught to us in 7 days. So a full semester's worth of material that they teach you.
The college students are like,
in 5 days.
Why are we paying for a longer version of that?
Exactly.
Could have done boot camp.
So I did that when I was 12. I did it again when I was 13. Then I did music camp the next year, and music camp the next year. Like just always doing something to get up in front of people. And that's what I thought I was going to be doing for the rest of my life. So I always did anything that could get me up in front of people. So I would, I was in quartets and ensembles and doing singing things. And then I was also preaching. And then I would do at fine arts competition, where I would do like humorous interpretation speeches and do like, stand-up comedy bits from Brian Regan or whatever. Yeah. And then do duet acting with a buddy of mine, and whatever I could do. I was Scrooge in our high school play, in front of however many people came through that, 1,000, 2,000 people that came through that weekend. I was always just like, I knew that's what I wanted to do, and I was always trying to like get more opportunities to get up in front of people. Yeah. So, but that was always from a young age.
So in 13-year-old Travis's mind, how did you perceive like the core things in life, like money, relationships, business? Like, did you have even a way to think about those things? Was it something where you had a hierarchy where it's like, okay, I have this one track mind where it's like, what do I need to do to be preaching?
Yeah.
How did you categorize that stuff?
So I was very all in on whatever I was doing, and I'm still that way. I'm just an all in type of a person. So at the time I was all in on ministry, and like in my spare time in study hall, if I was done with all my homework, I would be like working on a sermon for fun. You know what I mean? So like I was
cool kid there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I did get bullied a little bit around that time period for being that way. But I was always all in at what I wanted to do. And money was always interesting to me, but because of growing up in that culture, it always got put on the back burner. So like I brought, do you remember these little creepy crawly machines that you could get when you're a kid? So it was like the boy version
That's
of...
right. Insert the picture of you as Scrooge as the old man explaining the creepy crawly machine. I remember way back when.
So it was like the boy version of Easy Bake Ovens.
Okay.
Because my sister had an Easy Bake Oven, and I was like, I want one of those, and it was like, no, you can't have that because you're a boy.
Yeah.
For some reason, boys can't bake. But
where
anyway.
would you be now?
If I had just gotten that Easy Bake?
Premier chef.
Really, I would just be a fatty
Hold on,
eating
let me take a note
brownies.
about How does that make you feel?
So they got me this little creepy crawly machine when I was in elementary school, and I would make little bugs, and I'd bring them to school and sell them to other kids at school when I was in like 4th grade, 5th grade. And like, depending on how many colors they had, I would sell it for more or sell it for less. And I would like use that money to go buy popsicles at lunch or whatever. You know what I mean? So I was always like, there's always something I was hustling, do it. Like, I kind of had an inclination to do that. And then by junior year, right around the time I was getting my driver's license, I started doing a landscaping business. So I always, and a lot of that I credit to my mom and dad, just because they were that way. My dad was a real estate agent, and so he was always selling houses or looking for houses to flip or whatever. So I always had like a desire to do it to some extent, but it was far overshadowed by my desire to be in ministry for sure. So it was always like this is number one. But if I can like make some money along, I was like, the Apostle Paul made tents on the side to pay for it. You know what I mean? So like, it's doable.
Well, it's a weird thing in that context where money was so revered.
Yeah.
So like,
that's something we talked about before.
It's like you're not supposed to pursue money.
Yeah.
But the people that had money had buildings named after them.
We were treated like gods on campus.
And it was always weird to me because like, I remember our pastor was friends with I don't remember his name because I'm not a baseball fan, but he was some baseball player that was very wealthy, and he would come around the school and everyone was like, oh, look at the classes, look at that, hoping he would donate some amount of money.
Of course.
And I just remember it was always odd to me that it's like, I'd go to youth conference at your church, and then I remember when they had like literally mannequins dressed up as like construction worker, doctor, this. And then they had like a mannequin in a suit. It's like, you could be all these things, or you could be a pastor. And I think it was called, it was Higher Calling was the theme of the youth conference. And it was like, it's weird that we're sitting in buildings named after people that did not become pastors, who worked hard to donate these buildings. And then you dedicate the buildings to them. And then in those buildings, you're vilifying the path that gave them
the very thing that they did.
The building.
And the wild thing is like, you will be vilified for doing that path until you get the accomplishments that they've gotten, and they're ready to hit you up for donation checks.
And then
like,
they'll
that's
also
the weird
become
thing.
lax on what beliefs you need to hold
totally.
to.
The standards and doctrines that you're held to all of a sudden go out the window. It's like, oh yeah, well, he doesn't read from the King James Version, but his cash is like really like his check cashes, and that's more important to us, So it's like, well, that person like goes to a community church who we would like in that world would totally vilify all the time. Like our pastors and preachers would be like, oh, I got invited, because our pastor would get invited to these like, pastors conferences or whatever, with like, or leadership summits from really well-known people, like a John Maxwell, he'd get these invites to these, places, and he'd be like, it was always a point of pride to be like, oh, I'm not going to go blah, 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 because you don't fellowship with people who disagreed with you. So it was just this really weird dynamic where it was like, I wanted more of my pastor's time because, like I said, he was like the guy, and he was the guy at my church. So like the college, there's 1,000 students there. There's, I don't know, 300 or 400 students in the high school. But out of 1,000 students that were at the college, and it's gone way down since I was there. I think when I was there, it was the biggest the college ever was. It was like 940 something students.
It was all because of you.
It was mostly because of me. But it was like the heyday of the college. And there was like 900 something students. of the 900 there's probably like 40 or 50 of us that were like Lancaster kids. We're called Lancaster brats is what everybody would refer to us as because we had special privileges walking around campus. But so like all of the college students there are like, looking at the pastor as like, this is the guy, you know what I mean? It was like, well, that's my pastor. And I actually know him and he knows me because I've been going to the church since I was 3. But like, I don't get any of his time and I don't get any of the top tier staff's time. You know what I mean? Unless it's something like, all right, now it's time to pick a ministry. Which one are you going to go to? I didn't get much of their time. And then all of a sudden, like a multimillionaire comes on campus and like they roll out the red carpet and spend hours with this person for multiple days. You know what I mean? It's just like, wait a second. I thought that making money was bad. I thought that you're not supposed to pursue, the wealth of this world. I thought that you're not, but then all of a sudden we're doing all of that. Like what, but if I go and do it after I grew up here, I'm vilified for doing that. At least until you have a new building that you want to raise money for. And then it's like, oh, let's hit up our alumni and see if they want to give us money. It's like, well, not really. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like there's such a disconnect there between this is what you should be doing and this is what you shouldn't be doing. But if you do the thing you shouldn't be doing, we're not going to like it until you do well at it. And then we'll like it so much that we're going to spend more time with you.
Yeah.
It was like, wait, what's going on here? This is so weird.
When's the last time you got hit up with an alumni?
Oh, in the last couple of years. Yeah. I'm just on some sort of a list. Just like 10, 15 grand.
The real amount. So it sounds like when we've talked about this before that a big kind of breaking point, you call it the crack in the dam, like this thing that starts chipping away at the belief system. Money seems to be heavily rooted in that, where it's like, I don't think it was just like, oh, I want money, so forget all this. But it seems like that disconnect we're talking about was really the thing that started fracturing you from the certainty of, well, the path they're laying out for me really makes sense versus what functionally makes sense.
So I wouldn't say it was money as much as it was freedom. Like freedom is a big value of mine. And I do not take direction very well. I do not take orders very well. My whole adult life, I've had one like job job that the only reason I took it is that I did not have 100% commission paychecks long enough because I was 21 and I wasn't working for 2 years yet. I was working for like a year and a half, 100% commission. And I was trying to buy a house. And this is after the 2008 crash when TILA and RESPA and all the other laws came into place. And you got to be able to prove 100% commission income for 2 years plus in order to qualify for a home loan. So I was like, well, I can't do that. So I took an internal transfer at the job at the solar company I was doing sales for. And I got a salary for 5 weeks and people they made it, I had to like stick to a schedule and show up to the play and like do 2 days after we closed escrow on the house, I quit that job. And since then I've never had like a job. So I think first of all, that's like one big thing. It was the value of freedom. And I don't know if I would have been able to clearly articulate that at that time, because at the time what it felt like was just that like, I have the desire to do this thing. Everybody's telling me that I can't do this thing and I have to go do this thing. And just that, the fact that everybody's telling me I'm not allowed to go do something that feels right to me, that feels like I want to be doing it, feels like I enjoy doing it, but I have to go do this thing. It's just like, there's a disconnect here somewhere. And I wrestled with it obviously for a really long time because I was programmed and wired to be in ministry. And especially when you go to the college, not going into ministry afterwards is very taboo. So I said it to a couple of people, friends of mine, just like, hey, I'm thinking about taking this job because I had this job offer from the company I was working for. It was solid. Like I was 19, 20 years old. I was at the time making like 75,000. And then the new job offer was for a 6-figure position, like in San Diego. And it was like, seems like a pretty good opportunity. What do you guys think? And like every person I told it to was just like, don't do it. It's just the devil, trying to tempt you. Like you need to go into ministry, man. Like you need to go into ministry. And I don't fault. And I said that on a couple podcasts before. And then I've had those guys that watched them and reach out to me and be like, dude, I'm so sorry. I was just like, bro, you don't have to apologize. You were doing what you thought was right at the time.
Drinking the same.
Exactly. Like it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It just is what it is. And it is what it was. And at the time, it was just like, there's no other options. So I was interning. It was my junior year of college. I was interning at a church, and so we drive down every weekend. That's how I spent my weekends, my junior year of college. Instead of all the things that most people do junior year of college on the weekends, I was driving down to a church in Newport Beach. So it was 2 hours from Lancaster where it was. So every Friday night we'd leave after school and then go down there. We're up Saturday morning and we do the soul winning rally and then go soul winning. And then because we were like the interns at the church, it's like we wouldn't just go soul winning like everybody else did. We would go for hours, you know.
Yeah.
And so then we'd come back, we'd get some lunch, clean the church all Saturday afternoon for Sunday, which included like it was just like stacking and unstacking chairs was like the bane of my existence, because it was just, we had to set up their whole fellowship hall for like the Spanish service and then tear it down. So we'd set it up on Saturday, then Sunday it was all set up, and then we'd obviously have to get there early on Sunday. So right after church on Sunday, we would tear it down and re-clean the church for church Sunday night. So like the whole, like we're just working all day Saturday, all day Sunday. And then I come back to school for classes at 7:30 on Monday morning. And then after school on Monday, I'm working. So I have my sales job. But I found myself eagerly wanting to get back from what I was doing, from where I was interning, to get back to doing the thing that I knew I was going to be quitting in like 6 months so that I could go into ministry. And I didn't want to do the thing that I was supposed to be doing for the rest of my life, but I did want to do the thing that I was supposed to be quitting in a few months. It was like, not only did it make me more money, but I just enjoyed it more. Like it was the first time in my life that I started like reading articles and trying to get better at this thing that had nothing to do with school. There was no assignments. People weren't telling me I had to go do this or get better at this. It was just like, I like this. This is fun. And I enjoy this type of material. Yeah. And so from that point forward, I had really, really hard time like concentrating in class. And I was always pretty good at school. I wasn't like a 4.0 student, but high school, I was like a 3.8 or something. And I did get a 5.0 in physics and advanced math and calculus and stuff like that. And I enjoyed school. I enjoyed math more than
I didn't even know
anything.
The numbers weren't that high. No, I didn't.
Well, for AP classes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I was in, I was much lower.
Just in P classes.
I was well, but it was similar though in the sense that I knew very early on in high school what I wanted to do.
Yeah,
and so
that's
I instantly knew geometry does not matter.
Yeah,
physics does not matter, and so and I already was not good at math, but like the idea of like devoting time to learning a skill I know I'm not going to use was like the reason I was like getting D's in those classes. But then classes about literature that pertain to storytelling, I would do a lot better.
Sure.
It's a weird thing when you know what you want to do and then you're kind of constrained where you don't have the freedom to go pursue it. And I think what you just hit on is there's like doing schooling and then there's falling in love with education.
Yes.
And I think once you start falling in love with learning about something, you probably know that's the right direction to start pushing.
Especially for somebody like me, because I hated reading.
Right.
It was like a joke in my family. Like people would buy me books all the time to try to get me to read. I'd never even opened them. I was just like, I do not like doing this. Even the ones that I'd get assigned in class, like I'd read the back flap and do my speech. I was good at speaking, luckily. So like I just would make stuff up and it sounded good and I would get an A,
Yeah.
But I'd like the actual reading I didn't like. And that, at that time I finally started learning. And so, for the first time in my like education career, I just stopped caring as much, So like the, last 2 semesters really of school, in class, I would find myself like writing goals for my solar team.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Rather than paying attention. I was, skipping classes. I would take as much of the time away from class as you were allowed to take. Like I had people sign me into class. Like Bible Doctrines 3, I'm pretty sure I was there like 50% of the time. Like I would just skip and go eat breakfast at McDonald's with some friends or whatever. Yeah. BDocs 4. And they're like pretty heavy material classes, you know what I mean? And I was just like, I think my last semester I got like a 3.1 or something, which is not good for me. And I wasn't going to school. My projects, I was barely turning them in. I was so done. And I don't know if it was just done with school as much as it was I wanted to learn about the things I wanted to learn about. And there seemed the thing about the learning the other things was like there was a direct correlation between like the knowledge that I gained, the experiences that I took, the lessons that I learned, and like the size of my paycheck or the production of our team. Like there was like, I could see traction with what I was learning rather than like, oh, learn this, theological, philosophical, thing that, like eschatology.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do, no bearing on your life whatsoever. It's like our estimation of what could potentially be happening in the future and our exact translation of what that text says about that future, even though that contradicts what all these other people might say. Like that was not as good of a use of my time, in my opinion, as it was for me to like learn this other thing about sales, apply it, see a change in my paycheck, see see like a demeanor change in one of my sales reps when they would make more money and they would be able to like take the stress off of them. Cause we went to unaccredited college. That means there's no state funding. There's no grants. There's no, you pay for your school or you don't graduate. So, for a lot of those kids that were going there, they're working minimum wage jobs. So like when I took them and recruited them and trained them in sales, then they're getting like paychecks, like real paychecks. I was like, this is cool. I'm having like, I'm seeing real differences in what I'm doing now. Why am I, so yeah, I'll just never forget. I had a meeting with my pastor, and he basically just like wrote off. So like I'd been wrestling with this for months, and he was asking me about like, who had had job offers and stuff like that. And I went to interview days on campus, which where they, bring a bunch of pastors in and they interview all the seniors and they're trying to place people in ministry for when you graduate. And so, I had a couple of job offers and I was talking through them. And then I was just kind of like, but I think what I really want to do is take this part-time job offer from Josh, from a pastor up in Fresno, who happened to be my junior high youth pastor when I was in 7th, 8th grade. Who he actually was the one who encouraged me to go to preaching camp for the first time when I was like 12. And so I was like, I want to take this part-time job offer from him and then work full-time at this like solar company. And he was like, he goes, oh, did he not offer you a full-time? I'll make sure I call Josh and tell him he's got to offer you something full-time. And I was like, I appreciate that, but he actually did offer me something full-time. He just also offered me something part-time, and I'd rather do the part-time thing so that I can, do this thing because I've been really enjoying it. And, and he's like, oh, well, that's just the money talking. And sooner or later, you're gonna have to give that up and go into ministry and then just like move to the next thing. And I was just like, but I've been thinking about this for like 9 months. Like I've been losing sleep. I've had a difficult conversation with my then fiance, who's now my wife. Like at that time that's again, taboo to speak about not going into ministry. Like it shook her when I even mentioned it for the first time. It was difficult to have the conversation with my parents about like, hey, I'm thinking I might not do this thing. And so I was gearing up for this conversation with my pastor, because to get on his schedule, you got to schedule like 3-4 months in advance. Right. And then, when we finally have the meeting, he's 44 minutes late and we talk for 12 minutes. And then it's just like, all right, well, you're wrong. Do this instead. All right, next, bring you in. It's like, wait a second. Whoa, pump the brakes.
For context, how much face-to-face time total up to that point did you have?
If you're talking one-on-one, throughout my entire life, probably less than 8 hours.
Yeah. And see, I asked that because it's one of the things where, now I always say like the Bible verse that I always am like, I still think about all the time is, in a multitude of counselors, there's safety. I think I think if you have people that know you, that are in your circle, that can say, honestly, like, you're doing the right thing, or this is a really stupid idea and you're just biffing at this right now, that's important. What's weird about those environments is that even in a smaller church, like I think of mine where I had face-to-face time often, there was still a huge separation where like, you don't know me.
Yeah.
You know, and so like to speak into things when you don't know what I'm gifted at, you don't, aside from looking at a piece of paper saying, here's your grades,
or getting a report from your son on, because he was a youth pastor.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like how's Travis doing, And to be clear, I give Pastor Chappell a lot of credit for like handling as much as he handled. And obviously I disagree with him on several things at this point in my life, but I genuinely do have a deep level of respect for the guy. And I know that he was doing what he thought was best at that time with the information that he had. And so like, I'm not, trying to come in and be like, screw that guy or whatever. But that was the biggest problem that I had with it at the time. It was just like, you are, and a big lesson that I took away that I took into business with me, he was spending relationship capital that he did not have. Like you're overdrawn on our bank account. Like that, like you're not telling me not to take a meeting. You're not telling me not to go to Starbucks and go to, Coffee Bean instead. You're telling me to like alter the direction of my entire life and career.
Yeah.
That's a big withdrawal from a relationship bank account that you have not deposited that much in, like you have from afar. And I was grateful for his influence in my life at the time. But like in terms of me and you knowing each other and you knowing, like you having any, like not a single question for me, not even like why do you feel like you want to do that?
Right.
Nothing. Just like as soon as I brought it up, just like, well, that's wrong. Do this instead. Next, it's like, whoa, wait a second. Like you haven't even heard my side of the story. You don't even know who I am, except for through my parents and through my youth pastor.
Right.
Like, and again, that was a big lesson that I took away is like, relationships are everything. You can't spend capital in relationships that you have not yet earned.
Right.
And it does matter to have at least some sort of an indication of whether or not you have the ability to do that. At least give it a caveat, at least ask a couple questions, at least kind of be like, hey, this is kind of my opinion, but obviously there's a lot of things I don't know. And I know that you're going through a lot, like anything would have been nice, like any recognition as to like how crazy of a thing that would have gone a long way for me at that time. I didn't need much.
Right.
But I needed more than what happened. And so I basically from that point just like hid all the feelings that I was feeling because I just didn't want anybody, like when you're leaving that world and graduating, everybody just asks you, oh, where are you going to go serve? Where are you going to, like all the time. It's just like it's like the thing that people ask,
Like, how's the weather?
Exactly.
What church are you going to be serving at?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So I took the job with Josh just so I could tell people I was going into ministry. So whenever they'd ask, I'd be like, I'm going to serve up.
Where you were there.
The 1 week. Yeah.
I walked in one day, you're sitting at it's so weird because I still hadn't really formally met you to my knowledge.
Yeah.
I literally walk in.
I think we kind of semi knew each other through Jen because like I did photography at the time.
Yeah. But like, I don't remember. I just remember walking in, you're reading Jab, 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 Right Hook by Gary Vee. I don't know why I remember this so clearly. And then the next day I came in and you were not there. And the book was still there on the desk.
That describes my entire time in ministry. I got one paycheck from ministry ever, and it was that first week. I took a part-time job.
Set you for life.
Yeah.
You were set.
Never had to work again.
Well, it's not. So again, this is one of those things where you're going from an environment where you're very much defined by how certain you are about the beliefs that are being presented.
Yeah.
And again,
well, like literally they won't let you graduate unless you stand up during graduation. They'll read a doctrinal statement from the pulpit. So a very specific long doctrinal statement on each of like the core Bible doctrines from bibliology all the way through to eschatology. And then they will give their stance on it. And they'll say, if you agree with this statement, please stand. And even if you've gone through all 4 years, completed all of your required,
completed all your payments for those,
completed your payments and the work required to graduate, they will not let you graduate and get a diploma if you don't stand up to agree with the doctrinal statement.
And you'll be executed.
Well, you'll be executed from that world. Yeah, right. You know what I mean? But yeah, so to further emphasize the point that you were just making, like, yes, you didn't really have much, diversity of thought, and you weren't allowed to express a difference of opinion.
Well, because it sounds for me like what broke you away, going back to the who you know or what you know question, Josh seems like the first, maybe not the first, but I would say the first major figure that had influence where he was a who that was allowing you to question a what, or gave you an option of a different path.
He definitely was the first. Yeah, he was the first one.
So from that point, you're kind of spiraling into this environment of not knowing what the next step is. Like you're in uncharted territory here.
Correct.
Like, who were the next who's?
Yeah. And
like, how did your what shift over the next couple of weeks and months?
So yeah, Josh was definitely the first one. He was really the first one that made me realize there was an option.
Yeah.
Because at that time it was like full-time ministry or full-time ministry.
Because I'm sure you had people at your solar job that were like, yeah, do this. And,
well, no, because they were all working. They all went to the school.
Oh,
like literally of the like 30 people that were maybe 40 people that were working in our market, 18 of them were on my team. And all of them except for one went to the college.
So for everybody, the conversation was, what's after this?
Correct.
So you were the chain gang going back to the prison kind of thing. Like,
right.
All right, back to work.
Right. Well, those are the people that I tried to talk to about it because like they were on my team. They saw that I was doing well. They knew that I was good at my job. And so it was like, well, I have this potential opportunity to get promoted in the company to go do this other thing. I was like, no, don't do that,
Brother.
So there was pretty much nobody that I could talk to that was giving me any options. And so when I talked to Josh, he was the first pastor that told me like, hey, look, we have a full-time position that we need to fill, and we'd love for you to take that. We also have a part-time position in the media ministry that you could take, and then you could, work a job on the side. Or you can just come to the church. He's just like, we just want more young people like you to be a part of our church family. So even if it's just full-time somewhere else and you just want to come to the church, do that. And so it was the first time I had a conversation with somebody who was like, where he gave me the option, then presented me, and it just made complete sense to me, where he was like, look, if you don't feel like you want to be here, we don't want you to be here. And that's okay. Like that was the first time that I was like, oh no, duh. It's like, not only are you going to regret doing something you don't want to do, but you're also not going to be doing as good of a job at it because you don't want to be doing it. Yeah. And you're going to be taking the opportunity away from somebody else who could be doing the job to its fullest extent because they really want to be doing it. Right. It doesn't make sense for anybody for you to take this.
Underpaying you, which most ministries are, they're overpaying for somebody that doesn't want anything to do with where they're at.
Correct. Correct.
The logic doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So it was the first time I was like, oh, okay, well, that's an option. So I took the part-time media ministry thing. And then that's when we were moving to Fresno.
Media ministry?
Yeah, it was going to be media. Because at the time I was doing a lot of photography. I was in like video stuff, and I was always involved with different plays. And anyway, so I took this, and that's why I was reading Jab, 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 Right Hook, because I was going to be doing like social media and social media ministry, and that's why Dan gave me a copy of Gary Vee's book, Jab, 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 Right Hook.
He gives that to everybody when he meets him, I guess.
Hey man,
read this book. Shout out Dan. So yeah, that week I was basically there for like 3 days, and then that's when that internal transfer at my solar company took place, because I was trying to get that house. So we wrote an offer on a house, and they were like, you need to have a salary, or you won't be able to qualify. So that week I took that internal transfer, and then my schedule was I was working on Sundays, so I couldn't do the job of the media ministry thing. So it was just like, hey, as soon as I can stop doing this job, I'll go back into the media ministry. 5 weeks is all it took for me to realize like I don't want to be in ministry. Yeah. So those 5 weeks were like I couldn't do it because my job didn't allow me to do it. By the time I quit that job, I had full clarity to be like, I'm not doing this, and I want to go do this now. Yeah. It's rare to get that clarity. It's kind of like what happened with COVID, where people took a Sunday or two off.
Yeah.
And then they're like, our Sunday is not only fine, it's far better than it was.
So to answer your question from earlier, it was really like, it was Josh first to allow me the freedom to be able to make a decision for myself in that time. And then moving away from Lancaster for the first time in my life, really, I mean, like I was born in Fontana, but I grew up in Lancaster since I was 3. And Lake LA, beautiful Lake LA, for a while. So when I moved,
the rippling pools of water over
Lake Los Angeles sounds amazing. But if you drive through it, first of all, you might miss it if you blink.
Where's the lake?
But there's there's a stoplight, a gas station, a Mexican restaurant, a burger joint, and that's about it for the whole town. It's mostly a meth town, like 10, 15 miles east of Lancaster, which it's even crappier than Lancaster is, and Lancaster's not the greatest. But anyway, I digress. So I grew up Lake LA, Lancaster. So moving to Fresno to be in ministry was like the first time I was ever away from home, away from the massive bubble that I grew up in. Because as soon as I was in kindergarten, I was enrolled at the school. Mm-hmm. So we were going to church before I was in kindergarten. All my friends, some of the pros from that is that, my friends that I have now are they're like brothers and sisters to me, people I grew up with from literally the time that I was 3, 4 years old all the way through, 17, 18, even some of them went to college with, so some of those people, some of those relationships are amazing. But then when I moved to Fresno for the first time, it was just the first time I was away from that bubble, and I was outside of the influence of everybody that I was under the influence of the whole time I grew up. And all it took was 5 weeks of being away from that to be able to make a decision that I'm going to pursue this other path, and I don't want to be in ministry anymore. And so I started doing door-to-door again, because that's what I did in college, and that was really all I knew how to do, and I was pretty good at it. So I did door-to-door for this So funny, man. It was a network marketing company that switched their business model to door to door. So it was like a direct TV satellite company, and they had an MLM model to sell their products. And
Which
I was
is
doing
huge
that.
now.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Everyone's getting satellites, you know.
So I was selling that for like 8 months on the side. They swapped to door to door, and they were recruiting managers. And like, I have door to door experience, so I switched from solar to do door to door direct TV. But like a week later, they added alarms into their packages. So it was like we called it a triple play. So it was direct TV, an alarm, and a phone line. So
this was 1984.
Yeah, exactly.
Just buy a landline and a vacuum cleaner, or
so
Cutco knives while you're here.
So we started selling this triple play thing, and I was the manager, and I recruited like 10 people. We were like off to the races and started knocking. Like 3 weeks later is when one of the other local alarm companies saw that we were knocking, and they got in touch with me, and then sat down. And so the question about the who thing was Zach, this guy who owned the alarm company, was kind of that next who was like really one of the first people to kind of mentor me in the business world, especially in the sales world. And he recruited me to his alarm company, which made it easier. Like the commission was technically a little bit less, but I only had to sell an alarm. I didn't have to sell alarm, satellite, phone line to make the same amount of money. Plus, he gave me a $10,000 signing bonus. And so I was like, all right, well, that kind of makes this a clear decision, clear path moving forward. And started selling door-to-door alarms at the time, and thought I was going to do that for like a decade, you know, and obviously I didn't. But
well, I want to talk about that in our next episode, but I want to ask you now. I think people probably have an idea from the story, but you've asked hundreds of people who you know or what you know. Who you know or what you know. Which one do you think is more important?
Yeah, so the background on that question too is that when I was first starting, I just wrote out a list of like 25 questions that I was going to ask people, because my show was called Build Your Network, and I wanted to be about networking, whatever. And I'd always heard the phrase, who you know is more important than what you know. And so the first time I wrote that question down is like, do you believe who you know is more important or what you know is more important, and why? I figured that it was just that everybody was going to say who, and then we'd agree on networking, and then we'd keep talking about networking. It's like, that's the segue into the networking conversation. Is like, who you know or what you know. Everybody's like, who you know, and then we agree, and then we talk about it, you know. And then to my surprise, I started asking that question. And I started getting people that were like, what you know, or they'd be like, what you know with who you know, or who you know with what you know, or it's not what you know or who you know, it's who knows you.
Transition from that.
Yeah, and it's like, wait a second, that kind of like negates the reason for this show existing. But it challenged me to make me kind of go like, what do I really believe about this? So I've seen a few people weigh in on this recently that are like extremely successful, you know, and they will point out it's what you know, because if you get really good at something, then people will be drawn to you and you can build relationships that way. It's like, yes, I agree that is a method to doing it. However, I think that it is not as duplicatable, because you have to have some form of outsized success to really attract those like big relationships into your life. And doing it that way is, in my opinion, a longer road, and not as duplicatable. So like as generic advice, most people, because like luck is a factor, timing is a factor. And so like if you just work on it by yourself for a long time, it's like you're going to figure it out potentially eventually. But, you know, you could have learned a lot more. And frankly, the people that are saying it's what you know, if you examined what they do, you know, like it's really back to who you know, you know, because like I'll look at those people and be like, but haven't you invested like $2 million in masterminds and coaching and consult? Like, that's a lot of knowledge and information that you gained from people. Yeah. And it's like the punchline is that both of them are important. It's kind of like a cycle. And depending on what position you are currently in life, you might should be working a little bit more on the what, and maybe sometimes you should be working a little bit more on the who. I just genuinely think that most people should be working more on the who than the what, especially at first, because I found that who dramatically increases what if you're intentional about the who. Whereas the opposite is not necessarily true. The more you do on a what does not necessarily feed a who, unless again it's outsized, right? Like it's like a Hormozy example where it's like, oh well, you became famous, you became super wealthy. But like a lot of people have worked really hard and done really well, and nobody knows who they are still, and they don't get the opportunities that he gets because he worked on the what so much. You know what I mean? So if you have that type of success, or, you know, you have a Zuckerberg, or you have some of these people that are just insanely successful, of course that's going to attract opportunity. And of course you're going to be able to get in whatever circle and get intros to whoever you want to meet in the entire world. I get all of that. But as a generic like advice for a 19-year-old, it's like, if you just go work for somebody who's really, really good at what they do, the speed at which you will learn that skill is significantly faster than you trying to go do it by yourself, is my only point in saying that. Is like, you know, if you go golf every week for a year by yourself, you might get a little bit better. If you go golf every week for a year with people that are worse than you might get a little bit better just because you're golfing a lot. If you go golf every week for a year with people who are significantly better than you will get significantly better. You know what I'm saying? Like you will, the rate at which you will learn is just so much higher. So I still think it's who you know because of that, because I think who you know feeds what you know more than what you know feeds who you know. Yeah. If that makes sense. The second reason, and the thing to me that puts it over the top, is this happiness study that came out from Harvard, the longest, you know, and most famous study on happiness. And they're measuring these different things over the course of people's lives, and that they thought would attribute to long living, better health, you know, really baseline things that they thought would be significant. But to their surprise, over the course of the study, they found that it wasn't even close. Interpersonal relationships was the number one indicator of not just happiness, but also physical and mental health. So there's studies out now that suggest, and through peer-reviewed data, that that loneliness is loneliness is worse for you than smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day in terms of your physical health, not just mental health, like heart disease, cancer, things like that. Like that loneliness increases maybe not cancer, heart disease though, for sure. That loneliness increases the risk of those things. And so because of that, I give who you know an extra boost, because it's like, not only will it, in my opinion, bring you more opportunity, make you more successful, help you learn at a much faster rate, but it will also bring you more happiness, more fulfillment. If you have great interpersonal relationships with people who are constantly making you a better version of yourself, that's only going to make you like that, like solving for that long term, in my opinion, will bring you a much better, happier, more fulfilled life than the opposite. Because like success is not the determining factor of a life well lived, right? It's like, it's all of these things. So if you're like, oh, it's what you know, it's what you know, it's what you know, and you're constantly focused on that, and like you bring a couple who's in now and again, and it's like, but you're so focused on getting good at something. It's like, those are the people that wake up single and they're 60 and they have a ton of money. But it's like, what else? Yeah. What else do you have? Is that really what life is about? You know, like I just don't think so. And maybe it is for some people, you know, like I'm not here to say that this is the right thing for everybody. But also, I think if you're going to take like the statistical average, and where like most of us fit into, probably relationships are the most important thing that you can ever invest in, for multiple reasons, not just for success, but also for happiness. And, you know, those two things are, you know, decide which one's more important to you, you know, I guess.
So the big takeaway is, if you're going to smoke a pack of cigarettes, do it with a friend.
Correct.
Perfect.
Yeah.
No, I want to dive a little bit deeper into kind of finding clarity in the next episode, but I think that's a good place to stop for this one. So we'll see you guys in the next conversation.
Peace.